welcome to the EcoBloom podcast. Today we have Chris Hayes, Director in UK India Business Council and his team organization set up for promotion of trade, business and investments between India and UK. Chris is chartered management accountant by himself and carrying extensive knowledge in financial, professional, and legal services across the sector. And today we'll try to get the insights from him and understand his point of view, what's happening in the UK accounting industry and businesses in general. Thanks, Chris. Thanks a lot for joining with us here at EcoBlue Podcast. We would definitely have, try to have cleaned information from your side. Or what are your thoughts on the accounting industry and businesses in general? How is it going there at your side, Chris?
Hi, Dipankar. Thanks very much for having me. Well, it's a nice sunny day at least, which is helping in terms of the lockdown. I think on the UK side, there's been a lot of initiatives that have been done by the UK government in terms of trying to help businesses through this difficult time. So we're starting to see now that those businesses are taking up that support. But there's quite a difference, I guess, depending upon which sector of businesses the businesses are in, really, about what's happening across the UK. But I think everyone's now come to terms with the fact of this is the new normal, as the UK government is calling it. Here they're talking about there being social distancing in place in some form until Christmas. Maybe even early into next new year. So I think everybody's trying to sort of get used to that fact, really, which is something that's quite difficult, really, to process.
Yes, absolutely. On that note, when you mentioned that this is the new normal, this is absolutely on very positive note. I would definitely want to ask your thoughts on the sectors to watch out for, for the accountants, for the UK accountants, what they can look up to on the sectors specifically, because I believe the hospitality sector and the other sectors, they are down right now. So for the UK accountants, what are your thoughts on the sectors that UK accountants they should be looking at for right now?
Yeah, so I think the difficulty in the sectors is obviously all related to the social distancing elements. So I think the hospitality industry, so hotels, restaurants, bars, they are, most definitely going to be the worst affected. We are starting to see some innovation happening. So, for instance, my local pub is now doing deliveries, and so they will basically deliver food to your house. They're starting to do market stalls. So we are starting to see some innovation coming through. Deliveries of food is allowed. So again, we're starting to see some of the fast food restaurants starting to open up in small test beds. But that will not obviously in any way detract from the experience. And obviously the issue that the restaurants and pubs will have is that once they've placed their staff into the furloughed situation, then so the furlough scheme is a scheme run by the UK government, which means that any business who is unable to operate and therefore would have had to make those staff redundant are able to put those staff into the government scheme, which means the government will pay 80% of their wages up to £2,500. So for these hospitality jobs, that's great because at least the business is getting what is the vast proportion of their overheads in the staff is getting that back. I guess the challenge comes that if that scheme finishes and there is still the apprehension of people to go to restaurants and bars, so takings are down, but there is no government support there, that's where the big issue will lie. That's the same for retailers. Retailers are obviously able to diversify, and many already have through online sales. However, if you look at one of the biggest retailers in the UK, which is Next, they reported yesterday that their first quarter sales were down 80%. So obviously a significant amount. But more interestingly, they reported that the 3 days prior to the lockdown, so when we were all still able to do everything that we wanted to do, that sales in their stores were down 90%. So this is what retailers are now having to factor in, that once they are reopening, that people will still be apprehensive to go out, and it will take longer to return to whatever the new normal is. So there are two sectors, and obviously the final sector that people and the accountants will need to look at is obviously the travel industry. Again, hugely affected. Yesterday, announcement from British Airways parent group, IAG, that they were looking to make 12,000 staff redundant, essentially, a significant proportion of their workforce. Again, they don't feel as if even when restrictions are removed, that people will naturally want to or even be able to travel. If you're booked a 2-week holiday from the UK to Spain, and if Spain is enforcing 2-week quarantine on anybody coming in, then obviously you're not going to want to travel just to basically spend 2 weeks in a room. So all of these areas that are the main sort of three sectors that I would say have been worst affected.
Yes. So, Chris, moving on to the next question, I would want to ask, since you have vast background in business development, and I know you have been part of Liverpool Business Embassy as well. So, and therefore, I would like to ask you, how should UK accountants approach in terms of keeping up with their revenue and new clients at this point of time and in near future? So, what are your thoughts on that?
So I think that accountants are absolutely critical during this time. I think there's a huge demand and a huge need for businesses to understand their cost base. I think accountants are best placed to be able to look through that cost base and work out what government schemes are available. And so again, in the UK, there is a business rates scheme which will essentially, for the small and medium businesses, that they could get grants from their local authority, but they could also stop paying their rates for 1 year. VAT has been suspended. So again, accountants being able to utilize that. So I guess the two areas that I would focus on is very much the cost base, reduction of the cost base wherever possible, wherever contracts can be frozen, renegotiation with landlords. There is a very simple government legislation that's meant that no businesses can be evicted during this time. So again, that opportunity to look at that legislation, translate it through into a negotiation stance, I think will be important. I think the more important than that, however, is cash flow. The accountants are absolutely fantastic at being able to look at cash flow, being able to put projections forward, and being able to show that senior management team when the business will run out of cash. And that then can be translated into requiring emergency loans, looking at short-term credit facilities, and also looking at all those aspects. And I guess the final aspect is how those accountants can support in terms of looking at the technological solutions. So how can we move towards online opportunities in those businesses? Is that available? One of the companies I work with, they do education. And so usually they go into classrooms and they do creative learning with businesses. However, during this time, it simply isn't available. But we've sort of pushed forward about 6 months ago to create a digital e-learning platform. And now that's starting to pay dividends. So again, all those aspects of being a creative thinker, looking at the numbers and producing what is, for me, is the most important aspect, and that's evidence-based reports. So, looking at fact, looking at forecasts, and, looking at maybe, a couple of different scenarios in that. It's hugely important for the accountants at the moment.
Yes. Chris, since you mentioned digital, and digital has been something that has been a buzzword since a while now, I'm sure you would agree to the fact.
Yeah.
So what's your take on digital? I mean, any light you want to throw upon the digital side of accounting? Just to give an example, because digital would help in keeping people connecting at this point of time. So accountants, specifically speaking on accountants, what are your thoughts? They can leverage digital as a technology and they can just keep up with their businesses.
Yeah, well, I think I think the accountancy industry has been quite at the forefront, really, of the digital revolution. We've sort of looked back at, sort of online accounting solutions that came forward. Then there was cloud-based accounting solutions.
Yeah.
So there's always been those innovations, and even now, the innovation of artificial intelligence being placed into accounting software packages that frees up the accountant's time from those more sort of menial manual tasks to actually being able to do what accountants should be doing, which is utilizing the numbers and creating those evidence-based reports rather than just generating the numbers. So I'm starting to see quite a significant shift in that. And I mean, the accounting packages that I use, there is an artificial intelligence in there that can do an automatic bank reconciliation. So again, something that would have taken you perhaps a day or two can be automatically done, and the only manual intervention is where there is a variance between what you've posted on the accounting software and what is in the bank. And again, the ability to sort of link your bank directly to your accounting software now. So that's happening all the time in the background. So you open up in the morning and your dashboard is up to date. So you're not looking at your last month's management accounts. You're looking at your now accounts. And I went to a conference recently, the accounting conference, and one of the companies was saying that huge company, huge global presence across the UK. They've introduced artificial intelligence now into their reporting. And whereas previously they would close down today for the April accounts, they would normally take 10 days to produce the management accounts. By the introduction of technology and making that process simpler, they can now do their full accounts in 4 hours, which is just, it's phenomenal, sort of, how that's happening. So accountants really need to be looking at that technology and not to be fearful of it as well. I think in terms of artificial intelligence, it's fantastic. It allows accountants to actually move up the value chain and start to add value. And it also helps accountants in terms of they are the best people to actually write those artificial intelligence programs as well. A program or a bot is simply undertaking a number of repetitive tasks through a decision tree. Accountants are best to actually decide what does that decision tree look like. And therefore, you should get to a position where you can almost start to actually reduce the manual element of, I've already mentioned bank reconciliation, but again, in terms of purchases, the budget manager produces the purchase order or authorizes the purchase order. Accounts produce the purchase order. The budget owner goods receipts that. Then there shouldn't be no more human interaction whatsoever in that process. The invoice should come in, it should match directly to the purchase order. There is a goods note straight away, 30 days payment, it goes in as a payment in 30 days, and it's just a payment that's authorized. So again, those elements of reducing and removing those human interactions and allowing those accountants, as I said, to actually take those numbers and start to really analyze, look at cost base, do the forecasts, and really start to increase their value in those businesses is exactly the position that we should be in.
Okay. So, speaking on technology, Chris, I just want to understand your prophecy and how do you foresee upcoming technologies coming into the businesses? Let's say 5G, and you just recently mentioned about AI. So how do you see the nature of businesses getting changed, Chris?
So I think there's a lot of discussion, isn't there, around 5G, and obviously, that super fast broadband network that will be created. I think, I think that what's happened during the COVID-19 situation has meant that there has been a huge demand placed on people's home networks. 5G obviously allows and enables us to take the fastest level of broadband out into the remote locations. There's also additional benefits in terms of the looking at it from the point of view of the more accurate sort of GPS data. So as an example, UK IBC is working to try to look at opening up the sports betting industry in India. Now, issues around that are that you are allowed to do certain activity in certain states, but not in other states. So how do you then look at that from a point of view of if you're doing this online? So through the 5G technology, you can actually pinpoint that person's location down to say if they are in one particular state or another state where it's not allowed. So it starts to add some real huge benefits in terms of that processing, everything becoming quicker, everything becoming more accurate. So that's going to be important. I think AI, obviously, I've just mentioned about that. I think that the other big technology which I've been looking at for quite a long time is the blockchain technology, and that ability for everything to be there in a ledger. I think that's something that accountants have been doing for a long time, producing audit files, producing that paper chain. But imagine the ability of doing that, that paper chain comes for you in a digital block. So, you are able to trace that money through to its original source via blockchain. There's even conversations about, as we move forward, will we actually need those intermediaries? So the moment if Tapanka, if I wanted to pay you, say for instance, I want to pay you £10, then what I have to do is I have to go through an intermediary. So that's either a bank or it's a fintech organization. If there is an open up blockchain, then I should be able to send that directly to you with no need for an intermediary whatsoever. So that's again an area where the banks are now starting to look, and obviously the rise of cryptocurrencies, meaning that there is no need for any foreign transactions, there's no currency risk that's involved, no hedging that's needed. So I think those are the three sort of big technologies that are really sort of exciting me at the moment.
And how do you see Internet of Things, impacting the businesses and specifically the accounting industry? Chris, can you take on that?
Yeah, so I think
because 5G and IoT, as they say, it's quite linked, and they are just expecting to a great rollover coming up. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, I think for me, we're starting to look at the Internet of Things, and you're starting to see that with smart homes. Everybody's got a situation now where most people have some sort of either Alexa or a Google device in their home. We obviously all have our phones with multi sensors on them. We have Fitbits, we have medical tracking devices. So for me, the challenge is not in terms of the information itself or having the devices. The challenge for me is around actually collating and understanding the data. I think it was said that there was more data that was produced in 2019 than the last 10 years put together. So how do you actually start to take all of that data and turn it into something that's actually meaningful? So, what does that data allow us? I think so many businesses now are so data rich, but actually don't understand what they can do with the data. So again, from the accountant's point of view, how do we sort of convert from the old accountancy as looking at currency to accountancy looking at data, and what is the value of data, and how can that data help predict trends in the future? How can that data help to shape the business lines that those companies need? And how can that data help in terms of predicting problems? So I think the manufacturing industry, if you've been using the Internet of Things for a long time, we work with Shell, and the oil and gas industry have been putting very critical sensors on all of their drilling caps when they're actually drilling for for oil.
So sensors, how they are catching up with the data.
Exactly, and the sensors that are testing the stress in the metal. So again, imagine on the manufacturing on the manufacturing line where you've got robots that have got sensors in them that know when they're getting too warm, they know when parts are starting to wear, and they're actually automatically communicating that to the engineers. The engineers are then able to work out when is the actual most opportune time to actually do that predictive maintenance, which is a sort of a buzzword. Again, you see that in the airline industry, in the fleet industry, in the logistics industry. So how the Internet of Things can start to predict when issues will happen so that you can actually fix them before they've even taken place, meaning no need to stop production, no need for that lorry to break down and that vital cargo not to get to its area, no need for that plane to have a fault when it's, before it takes off on the runway, and therefore meaning passengers are inconvenienced. So there is a huge benefit on the Internet of Things.
Wonderful. A lot can be expected on technology side coming over.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and Chris, I would want to move back onto accounting side. So how do you see the role of accountants changing, say, 5 years or 10 years down the line, in your thoughts?
Definitely moving more towards data. I
Mm-hmm.
think you can start to see that, and through my institute, the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants, they're pushing heavily in terms of the integration of data science into the accounting standards now. So how can accountants start to understand, these vast data lakes that are created? How can you get to a situation where, your GL codes are all balanced on a single system rather than multi-systems when you've got a multinational company? So trying to sort of move in that direction. And as I mentioned before, I very much see more accountants moving into that field of almost an AI engineer. So actually not creating or generating the code, but they're being the creation of platforms similar to sort of the revolution that happened in the websites. At the start of websites, every single person's website was bespoke. Then you started to get the creation of simple to use platforms to create your own websites. That's where I see, in terms of artificial intelligence, I'll start to see, or I predict that you'll start to see solutions coming out from Microsoft, from Google, from the big players, which will allow you to take a task and start to automate that. And accountants are best placed in terms of understanding the logic behind it, because data science and accounting is all based on logic. When we do a forecast and prediction, we're using a logical method. So we might be taking last year's accounts, we might be factoring that up, we might be looking at the budget against the actual, and making those significant, those changes across the budgets. But it's all based upon logic. And I think that analytical mind that accountants have is going to be absolutely key in terms of data.
Yeah, absolutely. I second that, Chris, because we have several clients and we have been working on these technologies, especially data science and insight, creating insights and things like that. It's really a cool thing in technology side. And the last question is, Chris, is specifically in a UK accounting industry. When we speak to a client, specifically, UK accounting firms, back there, they unanimously share their thoughts that there has been a lack of accounting talent pool in the UK industry. So what are your thoughts on that, and how do you want the UK accounting firms to address the situation right now?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of areas there. I think if we're all being honest, accountancy isn't deemed as a sexy occupation. Lots of people now want to be entrepreneurs. They want to work in fintech, all the sort of buzzwords that are going around at the moment. So for me, I think there's a couple of things. I think the accountancy industry needs to work together to understand why there isn't that talent pool coming through, why people don't see this as a long-term career. I think the second element is that the accountancy industry needs to look at different ways of recruiting people in. Historically, it's always been the accountancy, the big firms, the medium firms, they would all go to the universities, they will put their graduate employment schemes on, and they would take their intake of graduates. And that was sort of the be all and end all. Accountants now really need to start to look at those people that are leaving GCSE levels at 16, people maybe who haven't naturally gone through that standard education process, but have, you know, that very analytical mind. So again, through things like sort of the apprentice schemes and taking people at different ages and from different backgrounds as well, I think that's hugely important. And then I think it's also about people understanding the accountancy career as a bedrock. You know, one of the reasons that I went, you know, I did business and finance at A level. I then did an accountancy degree and went on obviously to do my chartered accountants. The reason I went into accountancy is because at the time there was a stat which was 80% of CEOs started off as accountants in some form or another. So for me, I wanted to be a CEO. So that was the natural route for me to actually go through, understand the numbers. And I think that's true now of every business. You know, all of those top management people need to understand the numbers. They need to understand the drivers behind the business, you know, and they need to understand the other social environmental impacts that are now coming through and being able to quantify and value that. So, you know, it's about the accountancy industry showing that it's not just about generating profit. It's not just about supporting their clients in the most efficient tax mechanisms, but it's about, you know, giving back to society in terms of creating those triple bottom lines, in terms of helping those businesses to really understand the importance of the work that they're doing and the social impact that that's having on their local and global community.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, Chris, on that note, allow me to wrap up the podcast at this moment, and hopefully we'll try to, you know, catch up with you at some point of time. So thank you very much for joining with us at EchoBloom Podcast. It was wonderful to have you here. Thank you very much. Have a good
Thanks.
day ahead.
Thank you very much. Cheers.